The year is 1889. Japan has recently started a drastic transformation in a period called the Meiji era. During this era, the country would transform from one made up of poor farmers to an industrial machine. And one of the fastest growing cities would become of vital importance to the country as a whole, Kyoto. This city was a major economic and cultural hub. And as the economy grew, many more people became specialists and opened small companies there. One of these was a small family-run business that made sets of playing cards. But today, it is one of the most influential companies ever made. If you haven't already guessed, that company is Nintendo. Nintendo would continue to make cards well into the 1900s. Even after World War II had completely destroyed the Japanese economy, Nintendo continued to produce cards. But the whole country was beginning to change. 50 years after the war, the year is 1995. After an economic miracle, the country was back on its feet. Industry was booming, the populations of major cities were quickly growing, and Japan had centered itself to become one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Not only was its GDP the highest it's ever been, but so were people's wages. Japan's economy had become the second largest in the world, and people were starting to wonder if it could overtake the United States. But despite how well Japan was looking on the outside, for the average citizen, life was still tough. The work week was long, and society could feel isolating at times. And there was one man who perfectly represented this: Katsuya Eguchi. In 1986, a 21-year-old Eguchi said goodbye to everyone he knew and moved across the country to a completely new city, Kyoto. The same city as the headquarters of Nintendo. Luckily for him, Katsuya found work at the company and got right to work on game design. Wait, game design? I thought it was a playing card company. Well, obviously the company had changed a lot over the almost century that it had been in operation. Eventually, Nintendo had switched from making cards to toys and eventually to video games. And this is the position that Katsuya found himself in at Nintendo. With the likes of Donkey Kong and the NES, Nintendo had made themselves a household name not only in Japan but also in the US. The business was thriving. Katsuya was able to find work on Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, Star Fox, Wave Race 64, and a few other games. But despite the company's success and how well his games were perceived, he somehow felt worse. He longed for the days of his childhood in Chiba, where he could see his friends and family every day. Since arriving in Kyoto, he only felt more and more alone. His life revolved around his work rather than his personal relationships. But Katsuya was a smart man. Not only had he helped design games, but he had also begun directing and supervising over games. And he had become quite a respected and decorated Nintendo employee. So when he finally pitched his own idea for a game, everyone was listening. But this game was different from anything Nintendo had ever published before. Sure, it would still keep the cartoony kid-friendly art style and gameplay of Nintendo, but unlike the fantastical worlds of Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon, the game was meant to mimic the everyday lives of the average person. Instead of having the superpowers to shoot fire out of your hands, to travel back in time, or to shoot down lightning bolts, the superpower in this game was having debt. You weren't anyone special in this game. You weren't saving the princess or becoming the best in the world. You were just one of the people in a small town trying to pay off your loan to a greedy landlord. Now, on the outside, this game probably seems like the most boring game of all time. I mean, who wants to play a debt simulator? But somehow, when it first released on the N64 in Japan in 2001, it became a success. People resonated with the game's premise, and they found it to be an escape to everyday life, despite the fact that it is a literal mirror to real life. But just not any life, Katsuya's life. The game was meant to show the importance of having friendships and being part of a community. In fact, he only came up with the idea for the game after experiencing the immense loneliness of moving to a new city. Animal Crossing is not meant to be the solution to make you stop feeling lonely, but rather to show you why you should build close relationships with other people, as this is what Katsuya's time in Kyoto led him to realize. But this isn't the only thing that was strange at the time. Animal Crossing also uses the real world's clock, so unless you're a cheater, the game will go at the exact pace as the day does. And sometimes it even makes you wait for the next day before you can even do anything. And while this does get very annoying at times, it is again meant to be realistic. You can't go through this game expecting everything to happen at once, but due to this game can feel really slow and even tedious. Sometimes you're forced to do the same things over and over just to get enough money to upgrade your house. However, Animal Crossing does something that makes all of that worth it. As you progress, you become friends with the villagers. You start to feel like you're really part of a community. Like, if you don't play for a while, your villagers will make you feel bad. And sometimes they'll even leave. You feel like you matter to these creatures, even though they're just pieces of code programmed to say this. Every part of the Animal Crossing games have a bit of somberness to them, especially the music. Many of the songs across the series are slow and even get emotional at times, much like Eguchi's own life. Despite this fact, Animal Crossing shows that there is still something to be hopeful for. As you go through the game, you become friends with the villagers and slowly pay off your debt. You start to adapt to the new city, becoming one of the villagers and an important person in the game. Whether it be working at the shop, becoming the mayor, or literally playing God himself, you become an idol to many of your villagers for working so hard. But unlike the real world, in Animal Crossing, you can't fail. There is no giving up or getting evicted. Katsuya was not trying to make a game that is a perfect representation of life. He still wanted to show the struggles that he went through, but also create a fun game that anyone of any age can play. And in this way, Animal Crossing is a massive success. Not only in terms of sales, but also in its goal. Millions of people have played this series over the more than 20 years of its life, and they've experienced that part of Katsuya's life. Yes, the game is obviously just a simulated and fictional version of it, but without even realizing it, all these people have lived through a part of his life, even if it was just a fraction of what actually happened. The reason I started this video all the way back in 1889 was for a good reason, as this time period for Japan was really the catalyst for what Eguchi had felt almost 100 years later. This marked the first time in Japanese history where people rapidly moved from their rural communities to the big city, and much like one of these farmers from a century ago, he moved away from everyone he knew and loved in search of a better life. But in reality, his journey only made him feel more lonely and isolated than ever before. After 1995, Japan's economy had become stagnant. The population and GDP completely went flat, and the country fell out of the running for the largest economy. However, Nintendo was still doing fantastic. Animal Crossing New Horizons became the best-selling game in the series, and the second best-selling game on the Switch. And throughout the years of the pandemic, the game's sense of community attracted people who were isolated. The quarantine years also somewhat paralleled Eguchi's experience in Kyoto. Everyone was locked away, isolated from their friends and family. So the game was kind of a perfect escape, not only to play a fun game, but also to experience life, even if it is just a cartoony simulation of it. Nevertheless, the game was able to bring millions of people together at the same time when everyone is apart from each other. And this is what Animal Crossing is all about. Bringing people together who feel like they're alone. Thanks for watching. See you later.